Look what we have here, gentlemen. Another simulator prodigy who probably thinks flying is like a video game. Honey, this is a T-38 Talon, not a crop duster from Daddy's farm. You sure you're in the right place? A wave of stifled chuckles rippled through the hangar, the sound sharp and ugly in the cavernous space. The young woman, barely out of her teens and swimming in a flight suit that seemed a size too big, said nothing. Her gaze remained fixed on the sleek, predatory lines of the jet, her expression as calm and unreadable as a deep lake. Her silence was a vacuum, and the men around her rushed to fill it with their own assumptions. But across the tarmac, old Colonel Madsen paused, his morning coffee halfway to his lips. His eyes, accustomed to scanning horizons for threats, narrowed not on her face, but on her hands, how they rested, patient and still, on the cockpit ladder, fingers aligned with a discipline he hadn't seen in decades. If you believe true skill needs no announcement, type competence below. She was an apparition, a ghost of a girl from a forgotten place, seemingly running from a life of dirt and fences into a world of thunder and steel. The lead instructor, Davies, a man whose confidence was built on the shaky foundation of his own mediocrity, saw only a target. He circled her like a shark, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "The paperwork says your scores are high," he sneered, loud enough for the entire class of aspiring aces to hear. "Must have a powerful daddy somewhere, pulling strings. Because there is no way someone like you gets a slot here on merit alone." The other candidates, young men full of swagger and brittle pride, shuffled their feet and smirked. They saw what Davies told them to see: an outsider, a token, an easy first casualty in the brutal washout process of elite flight school. They didn't see the perfect, unervingly still posture. They didn't notice that while their eyes darted around, hers were methodically scanning the Talon's fuselage, checking rivets and control surfaces from a distance, her mind already flying the machine before her body ever entered the cockpit. She simply stood there, absorbing the insults as if they were nothing more than meaningless background noise, a distant engine hum she had already filtered out. Her focus was absolute, her purpose singular. The public humiliation was a test, and she was passing it with a silence more profound than any shouted retort. The challenge was delivered with a predator's grin. "All right, farm girl," Davies announced, his voice booming over the hangar's comm system. "Let's see what you've got. We've got a fun one for you today. Full emergency simulation. Dual engine failure on final approach. Complete hydraulic loss. It's called a dead stick landing. 99% of pilots fail at their first time. Let's see you prove me right." It was a death sentence, a deliberate and public execution designed to break her on day one. A flicker of something, not fear, but perhaps anticipation, crossed her face as she climbed the ladder. In the observation room, the other candidates crowded around the monitors, eager for the carnage. Colonel Madsen stood at the back, arms crossed, his gaze locked on the simulator feed. The young woman settled into the cockpit, her movements not hesitant or rushed, but a fluid, economic ritual. The way her hands moved across the console was a language of its own, a silent poem of practiced motion. She wasn't learning the controls, she was greeting old friends. Each flick of a switch, each tap of a screen, was done with a placid certainty that was deeply unsettling to those watching. She didn't look like a student preparing for a test. She looked like a master returning to her craft. The tension in the control room was thick enough to taste, a mixture of gleeful expectation from the instructor and a growing, unspoken dread from the old colonel who was beginning to suspect he was witnessing something far outside the bounds of his experience. The simulation began, and the world dissolved into a screaming chaos of alarms and flashing red lights. "Engine 1 is out," Davies's voice crackled over the comms, a note of undisguised triumph in his tone. "There goes Engine 2. You're a glider now, sweetheart. Hydraulics are gone. Controls are failing. Good luck." But there was no panic in the cockpit. There was only a profound, almost holy calm. Her breathing remained slow and even, a steady rhythm against the cacophony of simulated failure. Her hands, those hands Madsen had noticed, began to move. They didn't fight the dying machine. They began a delicate dance with it, coaxing, guiding, persuading. On the main screen, the Talon, which should have been falling like a stone, instead entered a perfect, controlled glide. She was using rudder and trim with a precision that was theoretically possible, but almost never seen in practice. The nose held steady. The descent angle was flawless. The control room had gone completely, utterly silent. The snickering had died in the pilots' throats, replaced by a collective, strangled gasp. They were watching the impossible. They were seeing a level of airmanship that didn't belong in a training exercise. It belonged in the history books. The simulated runway grew larger on the screen, perfectly centered. With a final, gentle input, she flared the aircraft, and the digital wheels kissed the digital tarmac with less force than a sigh. The program flashed its verdict on the screen in stark, green letters: flawless recovery. Score: 100%. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the servers. Then, Davies whispered a single, broken phrase. "That's not possible." Colonel Madsen moved then, stepping forward from the shadows at the back of the room. He walked with the unhurried gait of a man whose authority needed no announcement, his boots echoing softly on the polished floor. He ignored the stunned, chalk-white face of Instructor Davies. He ignored the slack-jawed pilot candidates. He walked directly to the main console operator, his voice a low, gravelly command that cut through the shocked silence. "Pull up her file," he said. The operator fumbled, his hands shaking slightly. "Sir, it's restricted." Madsen leaned in, his gaze like ice. "Authorization code, Madsen 79er Delta." Now the operator's fingers flew across the keyboard. A moment later, a heavily redacted personnel file flashed onto the main monitor for the entire room to see, and the silence deepened into a state of reverent shock. The hastily assembled assumptions of the last hour crumbled into dust, revealed as the ignorant prejudice they always were. The truth, stark and undeniable, was laid bare, and it was more terrifying and awe-inspiring than any of them could have imagined. The name on the file seemed to burn on the screen, a brand of competence so extreme it bordered on the supernatural. Her entire presence on this base, which had been a subject of mockery and suspicion, was suddenly recontextualized into something else entirely, something far more significant. The room held its breath, waiting for the final, validating blow to fall. The list of credentials scrolled down the screen, each line a hammer blow to the arrogance that had filled the hangar. Name: Anya Volkov. Age: 19. Unit: Classified, Project Aurora. Flight hours: 2,800 in experimental hypersonic craft. Medals: Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with V for Valor. Mission classifications: Tier 1, Deep Black. Status: On loan for physiological data collection and legacy airframes, the T-38 wasn't a challenge for her. It was a relic, an antique she was flying for science. The men in the room weren't her peers. They were children playing with toys she had long since outgrown. The colonel picked up the microphone connected to the simulator, his expression one of profound, earned respect. He keyed the comm, "Captain Volkov." His voice was formal, crisp. "Colonel Madsen, your landing was textbook. Welcome to the program, ma'am." The word captain and the honorific ma'am landed with the force of a sonic boom. He then turned, his gaze sweeping over the now ashamed faces in the room. His voice dropped, becoming cold steel. "Let this be a lesson. Assumptions are the enemy of excellence. You saw a girl running from a farm. I saw a professional who has forgotten more about flying under pressure than any of you will ever know. Mr. Davies, you judged the cover of a book you are not even cleared to read. You mistook her silence for weakness. That silence was discipline. That silence was competence. The kind of discipline that has kept her alive in situations you cannot even simulate, in aircraft you will never see. The story of the farm girl, who was secretly a Tier 1 test pilot, a ghost from the bleeding edge of aerospace technology, spread through the base like a wildfire. It was whispered in the mess halls, debated in the barracks, and analyzed with reverence by the maintenance crews who now treated her aircraft like a sacred object. The narrative took on a life of its own, growing into a modern myth. The impossible dead-stick landing was given a name: the Volkov Glide. It became the new benchmark, a symbol of unattainable perfection that every pilot now chased. Instructor Davies, stripped of his arrogance, was formally reprimanded by Madsen. The next morning, in front of the entire class, he stood before Anya. There was no sarcasm in his voice now, only a raw, painful humility. Captain Volkov, he began, his voice cracking slightly. I was wrong. My assumptions were unprofessional and my conduct was unacceptable. I apologize. He then did something no one expected. I have a lot to learn. If you'd be willing, I would be honored to learn from you. It was a complete surrender, a public admission that he was the student and she, the master. He had been running from his own insecurities, and her quiet competence had finally caught up, lifting him toward a better version of himself. He was no longer the loudmouth gatekeeper, but a humbled man ready to listen. Anya simply looked at him, her calm expression unwavering, and gave a short, simple nod. Understood, instructor, she said, affording him a respect he hadn't earned but now desperately needed. There was no triumph in her eyes, no hint of, I told you so. Vengeance was a foreign concept to her. Her world was one of physics, precision, and performance. The validation of others was irrelevant noise. Later that week, she was seen in the simulator bay long after hours, not practicing for herself, but standing quietly behind one of the candidates who had laughed at her, a young man who was struggling with carrier landing protocols. She didn't say a word. She simply reached past him and placed his hands on the correct controls, gently guiding his fingers through the sequence. Her actions became her language. Her competence became her method of teaching. The lesson was clear. Mastery wasn't about talking, it was about doing. In an official ceremony, the training command archived the data from her flawless simulation. It was officially designated the Aurora Protocol, a permanent fixture in the curriculum, a ghost in the machine that would guide generations of future pilots. The legend was now codified, a quiet, 19-year-old girl's legacy hidden in plain sight, a constant reminder of the day arrogance collided with reality and shattered. Months passed, and a profound change settled over the training wing. The brittle swagger and loud boasting that had defined the culture were gone, replaced by a quiet, shared sense of purpose. The pilot candidates spoke less and studied more. They competed not for bragging rights, but to get 1 percentage point closer to the Aurora Protocol's impossible standard. Instructor Davies became the best teacher on the base. His lessons now focused on humility, discipline, and the danger of underestimation. He often used his own story as a cautionary tale, a testament to the fact that the most valuable lessons are often the most humbling. He taught his students to look past the uniform, the rank, and the gender, and to instead seek out the quiet signs of true competence, the steady hands, the calm gaze, the economy of motion. He taught them to respect the silence, for it is in silence that true professionals are forged. The story of Anya Volkov became folklore, a foundational myth told to every new recruit on their first day. She was no longer just a pilot, she was a principal. The Volkov glide was more than a maneuver. It was a philosophy, a reminder that grace under pressure and precision in action were the true measures of a warrior. The quietest person in the room is often the most formidable, not because they are hiding some great secret, but because they have nothing to prove. Their worth is not a matter of opinion to be debated, but a fact to be demonstrated. Anya Volkov hadn't come to the base to teach a lesson. She was simply being herself. But her very existence became the lesson. She was the living embodiment of the truth that genuine strength does not need to announce itself. True confidence is calm. True legacy isn't what you say about yourself. It's what others whisper about you when you've left the room. Her time at the base was a brief chapter in her classified life, but her impact was permanent. She left behind a culture transformed, a group of arrogant boys who were on their way to becoming quiet professionals themselves. She had arrived appearing as if she were running from a simple past, but in reality, she brought a complex future with her, reminding everyone that the greatest heights are reached not with a roar, but with a silent, unwavering ascent. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.